Welcome on board the Rich Planet Starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this week's guest joins me for a third time on board the Starship. One of his areas of investigation is chemtrails, which allegedly are the result of spraying chemicals from aeroplanes. This phenomenon seems to be causing increasing levels of concern in the minds of the public. So without further ado, let's activate the teleporter and get him beamed up onto the ship. It's Andrew Johnson.
Good evening.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. It's nice you've improved the transporter there, I see.
So your third appearance on the Starship.
Yeah.
So you're becoming kind of a Starship stalwart.
Yes, I suppose this. Some would argue this, and some people think that this is, some people think this is a good sign, and some people think it's not a good sign. So I'll leave people to make their own mind up.
Right. Because your areas of research, a lot of people know about you from 9/11, but you research other areas, Andrew. Can you give us a rundown on what areas you're researching at the moment, other than 9/11?
Yeah. Well, I've been looking at things like what was mentioned with Neil Sanders, the Swedish twins story.
Mm-hmm.
I did a posting on that about the M6 motorway incident.
Yes.
That was very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I've looked at again some of the material that you've been covering, Richard, with the mind control and the underground bases. I've looked at some of that. The postings on my website are about anti-gravity. Mm-hmm. We met at Leeds conference, as perhaps a few people will know, and I did a talk on anti-gravity technology there, which obviously ties into the UFO subject. And I also showed in that presentation how the anti-gravity technology ties into the 9/11 scenario with some of the effects seen there.
Okay. Now, you've come on today to talk about chemtrails. Now, if we just start by, because obviously you see planes in the sky every day, and they have trails coming off them, and they're known as contrails, C-O-N. So can you explain what a legitimate contrail of an aeroplane is?
Certainly. It's a shortened version of condensation trail, and the way
con is short for condensation.
Correct.
Right?
So the way that I explain it to people is to liken it to, if you go out on a cold day in the winter and you breathe out and you see condensation forming from your breath. And it's a similar process which happens in that you have hot water vapor coming out of the back of a jet engine, because water vapor is one of the products of kerosene combustion. And this high up in the atmosphere doesn't actually form droplets of water, which is what the condensation is at ground level. It's ice crystals. So when these ice crystals then form, they give this sort of white appearance in the form. It looks like steam basically up in the sky. Cloud. It looks like a sort of type of cloud. And then gradually what will happen is these ice crystals will essentially re-evaporate and the trail will disappear. Now, my understanding was that if you go out on a cold morning and you breathe out, then the clouds of breath don't hang around for minutes on end. They basically disappear within a finite time of, say, a couple of seconds. With an aircraft trail, you're typically looking, as I understood it, as something like anything between about 15 seconds to 2 minutes for these trails to normally persist. But if you go out and observe this, you will see a huge variation in the times of persistence, up to from anything from just a few seconds, maybe 30 seconds, up to periods of an hour.
Yeah.
And so the whole debate about chemtrails is really about the time of persistence and what causes them to persist or not persist. And the whole mystery really is that they seem to persist for far longer than you would expect.
Right. Now, we've mentioned the name there, contrails, condensation trails, which jet fuel is a hydrocarbon. It burns with oxygen to create carbon dioxide, which is invisible, which, as we all know about, and H2O, water, which, as you say, then if it's cold enough outside the plane, that forms the crystals, which you can see, which is the contrail. Now we come on to chemtrail. So a lot of people are now saying that they think that passenger airliners and other aeroplanes, they're not just. It's not just a crystal trail. There's some chemicals being put in there. Now, most people just dismiss that out of hand. They say, "Well, you're just being paranoid. You're seeing these what are clearly contrails in the sky. You're balmy." You know, how would you counter that? It's just because you think there possibly is something else other than
that's
contrail.
right. I mean, it is a very difficult problem because, as we talked about earlier, once you start introducing things, say, into the fuel, then this is going to affect the performance of the engine. So if there is a large-scale change in chemicals added to the fuel, then it's going to directly affect the performance of the aircraft, because as we know, these are, finely tuned precision bits of machinery. So yes, it does present us with a problem if I come along and say, well, stuff has been added to the fuel to create these trails deliberately. And then an aero engineer will say, well, that can't be happening because if that was the case, then the engine's performance would be impaired and you wouldn't have a viable aircraft that would fly properly, etc., etc. So it becomes a very difficult problem. And at this point, I don't know whether something is being added to the fuel of all aircraft, some aircraft, or whether, for example, we're looking at separate nozzles being attached to the wings, which are spraying from a separate system, nothing to do with the fuel system.
Right. So it's an additional distribution system, adding something onto the plane which can be switched on and off independently. All right, and we're going to go into whether there is evidence of that in this interview. Now, most of the evidence is in what people take photographs of and video in the sky. As far as I'm aware, there's no very good whistleblower testimony or evidence that planes have been modified, but we can come on to that. But we look at some evidence that you've brought in today to show us about why you think certain trails cannot be just contrails.
Absolutely. What we'll do is we'll play this short video clip, which is a comparison. Now, this video clip came from Scott Stevens' website. We'll probably mention Scott Stevens later on. Now, he's an Idaho weatherman, and he was looking at weather pictures and seeing weather anomalies, which we will come on to, and he started to look at the chemtrailing issue. And basically what he did was he got some webcams, a couple of them, outside his house or maybe inside his house, pointing out the window, and then he did some of this time-lapse photography, where you take a picture every 30 seconds and then you make a movie out of it. And this particular one which he got, which I think was filmed in 2005.
And this is speeded up?
Yeah, so this is speeded up, I don't know, a factor of about 50 or 100 times or whatever. And in this particular clip, you can see we have an ordinary contrail being shown with a plane going across, and the trail disappears within perhaps the period I stated, 30 seconds to 2 minutes. But then in the same shot, you have this X, you have two other trails which have obviously come from different aircraft, and they persist. So in other words, they stay in the sky for the period that the other one does, which is a period of a couple of minutes, and they slowly drift across the frame from, as we see it, from left to right. They are in the form of an X, and they are trailing. So we know that these aircraft travel at roughly the same height. Obviously, there's some variation. Some of them can, when they form a trail, the trails, according to my understanding, start to form above about 27,000 feet. So in normal cases, you won't get any visible trail from an aircraft below about 27,000 feet, 28,000 feet, that sort of figure. So in this case, we've got two aircraft which are clearly above that figure because we're seeing trails from them, but one pair is persisting and the other one is not persisting.
All right, and there's no chance that cross is just a normal cloud or something like that? You think it has been made by a craft?
I think it's been made by aircraft. Now, of course, in this particular clip, we haven't got the aircraft coming across to show that they've laid that actual trail. But if you look at the shape of it, and the lines of it, it looks like an
Right.
aircraft trail.
Right.
You know, there's a very remote possibility that it could be a natural
Right.
cloud, of course, but yes. But if you look at this and observe it, you will see this happening, and we'll, you know, go on to some more evidence of that, specific evidence that I've got later on.
Right. And just to be critical of it, perhaps that the cross is 1,000 feet higher than the one that we saw, which means that it's colder, so the chemtrail is perhaps persisting longer.
Of course, I mean this is what was said to me when I've shown this clip to people, that oh, you don't know the two altitudes of those two planes. One, as you say, as you suggest, one could have been at 30,000 feet and the other could have been at 40,000 feet, and that is purely and solely the reason why we've got a difference in those trails. Now, you know, hand on my heart, I don't know if that's true or not,
Right.
but looking at the issue as I have for the last few years, that doesn't seem to explain everything.
All right. Well, tell us about this, Andrew.
Yeah, well, what we've got here is, once I'd set up my website, and I photographed a very interesting, what I would call a chemtrail grid in 2005, and then I started to set up some pages on my website about chemtrails. And I got various people writing to me, you know, expressing similar feelings, observations, showing me the same observations. And then in October the 18th, 2007, which we've got in this on this slide here, on the left we see a satellite picture, which is from the, I think it's called the MODIS system, on the rapid fire. I think the satellite's called rapid fire. And we see a view of the southwest of England mainly, although the full picture extends you know, further than that. And you can clearly see on this satellite picture a set of these thick trails. And if you work out the scale of this picture in terms of, you know, pixels per meter and this sort of thing, these trails are quite wide and they're quite long. And then the pictures on the right hand side are the trails observed on the ground. Not actually, one's in Hertfordshire, which I'm not sure, I think it'll probably be in the satellite picture, and one is in Keighley in West Yorkshire. And I had several people saying, Andrew, you know, we've had an enormous number of chemtrails today. Here's some pictures. And I took some pictures myself, because on that particular day I happened to be driving up from Derby up to Leeds, so I took my own pictures. So in other words, we've got corresponding pictures of trails from the ground and from space, and there were a lot of them. And this brings up one of the big problems with this idea that they're just ordinary trails. We get huge variations from day to day.
Right.
And we get these, we seem to get, you know, I get people writing to me, I've had huge numbers of trails today, and then the next day there's none.
It couldn't just be that on certain days the conditions are such that it persists the contrail far better.
Yeah, exactly. And this, of course, is the argument that most climatologists and meteorologists would say. They would say, well, it's just on that particular day the conditions were more favourable to the persistence of contrails. And this is the argument that's given. And I haven't really seen a good set of conditions that they in other words, the conditions under which contrails persist have not been properly defined.
Right.
And I brought this up with somebody in the Department of Environment, and I've got an article about this on my website, and that was in 2007. I wrote to them, and they referred to me to a report that was written by Professor Ulrich Schumann of the Institute of Atmospheric Physics, which I think is based in Germany. And it's a 26-page report, and in it they try and explain why contrails persist. And one of the theories, and it is a theory that this chap comes out with, is that it's to do with regions of ice supersaturation. And what that means is that conditions in the atmosphere can mean that there is a greater level of saturation in the air of moisture, in fact of ice crystals as it turns out, than would normally be the case under more average conditions. And then when a plane flies through this region of supersaturation, the contrail is much more likely to persist because of that particular moisture level in that portion of the air. And he says in this report, and it's listed in the report, that these regions of ice supersaturation have actually been measured with what is called LIDAR, which is like radar, where you reflect radio waves off things to get a reading of the distance. LIDAR measures the density of cloud, I believe, from the ground using laser light and the amount reflected back. And he says in his report the regions of ice supersaturation have been measured as a maximum of 150 kilometres in size. So I went on to the satellite pictures like the one we saw a minute ago, and I measured, using the information on the satellite picture, the length of the trail, and one of them was at least 300 kilometres long. So that was twice the length of one of these regions of supersaturation. So again, that really didn't marry up with my own observations.
But also you would say there's no firm evidence that that these are, from what I can see, that they're deliberately spraying something. But we come on to, a lot of people report like a grid pattern as opposed to just lines, as if they've selected a zone and then they've gone backwards and forwards that way and then that way. Tell us about that.
Well, we've got some pictures of that.
Okay.
I mean,
so
we can flick
some pictures.
That's right.
Now.
We'll show a few of these, because this isn't actually a grid as such, but it is a set of tram lines or parallel lines, as you can see. Now, I find it difficult to believe that you can have this in such a short space of time. You can have this many flights flying over Battle Creek, Michigan. You know, and again, if you read the accounts, if you go through enough of these accounts, you'll find that people see these trails in areas where there isn't supposed to be any air traffic coming over their point on the ground.
So it might be a secret military display or an exercise, perhaps?
This is the other argument that people use, and they'll say that, well, actually, if you look at the number of military flights that go across a given point in the ground in a day, it can be quite high. I've heard it said that, for example, they do military logistics where they will group together military flights on a certain day, you know, for a certain reason of moving all the equipment at the same time, or, you know, coordinating all the resources. So that can be why you get higher numbers of flights on certain days. But of course, with that information being kept secret, typically because of, you know, national security, it's actually very difficult to try and, you know, tie that data up with chemtrail observations.
And any other images?
Yeah, and we've got this one. This was posted on the Coast to Coast website. This, I didn't take this, and this was in 2003. But it's labelled like a noughts and crosses grid. Yeah. And it does seem very peculiar to me that you do repeatedly see these right-angled grids. Right. Now we cannot directly and immediately rule out that this is a deliberate spraying pattern. Right. But when you start to observe it over a period of time, that's what it looks like. It looks like the grid pattern is not a result of air traffic. All right. You know, channels.
We'll go into that in parts 2 and 3, Andrew, because you have invested in some technology which enables you to work out the actual flights and compare them to what's in the sky. But we're going to go for a short break now, so don't go away.